Hello, welcome to a new episode of Reptile TV. My intro animal is a knob-tailed gecko, the Australian knob-tailed gecko Nephrurus levis. Until a few years ago, this was still a complete rarity. By now, Nephrurus are being bred quite successfully, and they are relatively or somewhat affordable to get as terrarium animals. Especially in the last 1 or 2 years, they have really been bred in significantly larger numbers. And so they are actually affordable for almost anyone or for any terrarium enthusiast who wants one. This is a sub-adult animal, and the color morph is called red. They have a more intense red coloration. The wild type is a little bit browner. Really a great, beautiful terrarium animal. As I said, they are easy to breed and reproduce well, and that's why I want to show it to you today as our intro animal. Our topic today, UV measuring devices, misting systems and more. What is really worth it? I think actually, yes, no, it's not just for beginners. I think even for experienced terrarium keepers, even if you've had reptiles for 5 or 10 years, you might still be considering, well, a misting system would be pretty nice and practical. Plus, there are always new things coming onto the market, and years ago you would have thought, well, there's nothing decent out there anyway. These days there are actually really good products for terrarium keeping, and in this episode I want to talk a bit about what might make sense, what you could maybe save yourself from buying, or what you really don't even need to think about. I'm going to build this up step by step. We can all probably agree that a thermohygrometer belongs in every terrarium, right? I want to know what temperature I have in there. You can hang it somewhere on the side, but what's even more important than just hanging it in a random corner is that, especially at the beginning when the terrarium is new, you need to test out the different temperature zones. How many degrees do I have at the front? How much do I have at the back? How much at the top? How much underneath the spotlight? Cold corner, I need to test all that. For that I need a thermometer, and a hygrometer also makes sense, so I can get an idea here. Always have issues with humidity, which we often encounter in terrarium keeping. Or I notice, wow, I have 70–80% humidity there. How can that be? Well, who knows? Maybe the key word is poor ventilation, right? If I have a closed system like that and the humidity shoots up to 70 or 80%, then the ventilation probably isn't optimal either. But as I said, most of the time it's actually the other way around. I have too little humidity, so I need to measure that, I need to know it. I think we can all agree that's basic equipment. Step further would be the thermostat. I think you can generally run terrariums without a thermostat, especially with lizard terrariums. When it comes to thermostats, we're actually more in the direction of snakes, because especially with many desert lizards like bearded dragons and so on, I control everything with the lighting, and the thermostat doesn't make sense there. If I connect my lamp or my UV lamp to a thermostat and it keeps turning on and off, that's obviously not what it's supposed to do. But if I have a snake terrarium and I want 30 degrees during the day and 26 degrees at night, then a thermostat definitely makes sense. I can probably also save electricity with it, you know, which is pretty useful. So if I have a ball python terrarium with my heat panels and I let them run 24/7, then I do get a nighttime drop simply because the room gets cooler, so the terrarium also gets cooler. But maybe not as much as if I control everything with a thermostat and say at night, okay, now I can lower it to 26 degrees, then I can save energy. The thermostats are often combined. One channel is the thermostat. The second channel is often a timer switch where I can connect the lighting, so I can also avoid needing a separate timer switch. Buying a thermostat costs around 50 euros. And if I think about it, then I don't need a timer switch for that. If I buy a good one that also costs about 15 euros, then the thermostat only ends up costing me 35. I could save electricity with it, depending on the situation. So I think a thermostat is good, especially for a snake terrarium. If I have a bearded dragon or desert terrarium where most heat comes from the lamp, a thermostat doesn't make sense because I can't or shouldn't dim the UV lamp. At best, it would just break, or I'd end up with only half the lighting in the terrarium, which I definitely don't want. A hygrostat is a step beyond the thermostat. The hygrostat to right, let's quickly talk about the word itself. Meter and stat, you know. Earlier, I mentioned thermometer meter always means to measure, or hygrometer measures. A stat, like in hygrostat or thermostat, means to control, right? That's just a bit of background knowledge for now. So with the hygrostat, I can control the humidity in the terrarium. I usually connect it to a misting system, or sometimes a fogger, or really anything else that generates humidity in the environment. In theory, it's actually a great thing because I can precisely control the humidity. In practice, it's often actually a bit tricky for it to really work, because the misting system, for example, if I connect one, it's spray sent in let's say 1 or 2 minutes. It releases quite a lot of water, sometimes even more than you might expect. It also takes some time for the thermostat to sense, okay, the humidity is now higher. Now, it can happen that I get this kind of delay effect. For example, if I have a smaller terrarium, the hygrostat also says the humidity is only 50%, you need to bring it back up to 60, so start spraying now. Then the misting system starts spraying and keeps spraying and spraying. And due to technical reasons, until the thermostat notices, okay, now we're at 60%, it keeps spraying the whole time. And by then it can almost be too much, right? I think this problem especially occurs with small terrariums. If I often have a huge room as a terrarium, it doesn't matter as much, because then I can spray for a few minutes without flooding the whole space. But if I have a small terrarium and spray in there for 5 minutes, a lot of water goes through the nozzles in 5 minutes, and that can be too much. That's why I'm not a huge fan of hygrostats. I don't think it's used all that often. Sales show that there's relatively limited demand for hygrostats. For large terrariums, it definitely makes sense. For small terrariums, I think it's better to stay away. It just doesn't work, practically not as well, as I said, because of this reaction time. As an alternative, so if you now say, yes, but how do I manage the humidity, then nowadays, the new misting systems have a timer built in. With that, I can set it to turn on once, twice, 4 times, or 8 times a day, right? So if I turn it on 8 times a day, and the day has 24 hours, it goes on every 3 hours and sprays. Then I have a second control where I can set how many seconds it should run. So should it spray for just 10 seconds, or should it spray for a whole minute? I can set that with another button. And then there's a third button where I can adjust the intensity, like I can say, yes, spray at full power or only at half power or something like that. So I can adjust it like that and distribute it throughout the day, and then use my hygrometer to measure whether the humidity during the day is really as I want it to be. I think this is a better solution than the hygrostat I just mentioned. Since I've already explained the misting system, I'll stick with the misting system for now. These are really great, high quality instruments nowadays. These misting systems I just mentioned, with these nozzles, they work with pressure, with water pressure, and have a nozzle attached, and then the water is sprayed into the terrarium. There are other ways, I'll get to those in a moment, of how you can also create humidity not using spray nozzles. I think this spray nozzle method is the better approach. As I said, these systems really work well. Reptil, just to name one brand, has great misting systems in various sizes, from very small to really large ones with big water tanks attached. It works well. As I mentioned, I have these 3 adjustment knobs for when the spraying should happen. Really a very good tool for terrarium keeping, one that I can recommend to almost everyone, whether you have a bearded dragon terrarium, a ball python terrarium, a leopard gecko, no matter what you have. The advantage is that you don't have to spray by hand. Of course, there aren't only advantages to not spraying yourself, you know, it's just convenient when the system does the spraying. I would like to say one more thing. If you spray yourself with one of those normal plant sprayers or the ones that you pump into, that's also great, of course, because you're forced to do it every day or several times a day or maybe only every other day. You open the terrarium, you spray inside, you look around, you see everything while you're spraying. Not everything you do automatically is automatically good or better, you know, because then you're simply not forced to check things yourself anymore. The devices do it. And you only look in every few days. Well, to exaggerate a bit, you only check your terrarium every now and then, right? So that's just to illustrate the exaggeration. That's why I said every few days. Of course, you say, no, I still check in often. That's all fine, but just be aware of it. If you have a misting system, there's a risk that you'll be less attentive and won't look as closely into your terrarium. One more thing about misting systems, most sets usually come with 2, 3 or 4 nozzles. Be sparing with the nozzles. Even with just one nozzle, a lot of water comes out in that time. If you have a small terrarium and even something like 1.20 meters, I would consider a small terrarium or nozzle will most likely be enough for you. I wouldn't even think, oh, let's put a nozzle here and another there. I would rather just install one and, if needed, spray a bit longer with that single nozzle, and you'll have good humidity. If you put in too many nozzles, you run the risk, on the one hand, of having too much of overwatering it. You'll have to be even more precise with the dosing than with just one nozzle. And if you're only working with one nozzle, well, a nozzle is a wear part after all. Where, in the sense of scaling up, if you use it for a few months, eventually it will get clogged with lime, depending on how much lime you have in your water at home. For some people it happens faster, for others more slowly. At some point the nozzle is clogged and you can just throw it away. Cleaning the nozzles is almost impossible. Of course you can try, but usually it doesn't work. So you have to be aware that every few months you'll just have to throw away the nozzle and put in a new one. Obviously it's better if you only have one in there compared to having 2 or 3 in the terrarium, you know. I know people who use distilled or demineralized water for these misting systems because they say it causes less limescale buildup. I don't think it's worth it, you know. If you use this distilled water, it costs money. Every time one of those canisters costs 3, 4, 5 euros. If you use that, I'm not sure, on the one hand, I'm not certain if distilled water is actually that good for the animals, since the minerals are missing from the water and the animals do drink this water. I also think it might not be as healthy as tap water, which is of drinking water quality. That's one point. On the other hand, if you just do the math and look at how much distilled water costs you, you've probably easily paid for a new nozzle every few months, right? So the cheaper method is probably just to buy a new nozzle from time to time rather than constantly buying distilled water. Just my tip, I don't think it really makes sense. I just mentioned that there are other methods. These misting systems, as I said, work with high pressure and nozzles. There are also these ultrasonic foggers. They came out about 20, 25 years ago, and back then they were a sensation, and everyone thought they were great because you got this mist. I think it's actually the worst method for terrarium keeping. It's worse for one thing because of the membrane, which is wear part. I constantly have to replace this membrane. But what's even more significant here is that the mist I produce, this ultrasonic mist, or mist produced by ultrasound technology, when it goes into the terrarium, it actually has very little, if anything, in common with natural mist. I assume that the water droplets are probably larger rate, at least that's my guess then, the mist you find in nature. And what you really notice with many terrarium animals is that they don't tolerate this mist well. For example, ball pythons, if they're exposed to this mist and inhale it, they often develop pneumonia from it. And that's something I've already experienced with ball pythons. I've also heard it from other people. Dear ultrasounder, now we have a fly on the lens. Try blowing it off. Okay, these are the kinds of technical problems you get out here in nature, pure nature. So, dear manufacturers of ultrasonic nebulizers, forgive me if I sound negative about them. There are certainly areas where the ultrasonic nebulizer is also quite good and practical. As I said, I'm much more a fan of these spray nozzles. One more point to mention, there are also fountains you can place in the corner of the terrarium where water runs up and down. That's also good. You can use it. The fountain also helps to create a slightly higher humidity in the terrarium. It usually looks quite nice as well, so you can definitely do that. Make sure that the water doesn't top course. You can't just pump the same water around in a circle for 2 months. The water obviously won't get any better or fresher that way. So you need to be a bit careful to always use fresh water and to change the water regularly. Last point, UV meter right, we have that. We have it in the title, so of course I don't want to leave it out. A UV meter is of course only needed by people who use UV lamps. Usually that will be lizard or turtle keepers who have UV lighting like mixed light lamps or headlamps. There are UV meters for that, which let me measure if my lamp still emits UV or emits any UV at all. Let's say the more professional UV meters are still relatively expensive, but they're fairly good. They give me a UV index that I can definitely use. So I can say, for example, look, at the beginning the lamp had this much and now half a year later it only has this much. So especially this kind of comparison is definitely helpful. You know, if I notice half a year later, okay, now the UV index is almost 0, or at the spot where my animals sit under the lamp, it's almost 0. Then of course the UV lamp inside is no longer of any use. In that case, it definitely makes sense. These are maybe things you don't need right away as a beginner. So if I buy a complete set now, I definitely don't have to buy a UV meter right away, at least not if I trust the person who put the complete set together for me. But if I've been into terrarium keeping for a while now and my birthday or Christmas is coming up and I think, okay, a UV meter would actually be pretty handy for measuring, then maybe I can ask for it as a gift or buy it for myself or something. So it's definitely something that broadens the scope of the hobby a bit and can offer some support. Alternatively, there are these simple UV meters, which we also offer. For example, they're either like credit cards that show me whether UV is present here or no, depending on the color change. A strong color means a lot of UV light. A very faint color means little UV light. That's actually not bad either, because at least I can test whether I have any UV at all. Does my lamp still emit UV light, or is it a matter of the distance? Or, for example, I have a tube light in the terrarium and 50 centimeters lower, I can measure whether any UV is actually reaching down there at all. I think that can be quite a helpful tool, and it only costs a few euros. So that's definitely affordable for everyone, making it easy to spend those 3, 4 or even 5 euros and check, do I really have UV light in my terrarium? So I can definitely recommend that, even for complete beginners, at least to test it out and see for themselves. That was my, as always, quick run through, a rapid overview of the very latest technology in terrariums. What do you really need and what don't you need? As I said before, I think I tried to explain it, you know, in a sort of ascending order. So things you definitely need, like a thermohygrometer and such, and things you can use, but don't necessarily have to. Yes, those were my points on the topic. I'm looking forward to your feedback. Comment below if you think, oh, Stefan, this and that is also available in herpetoculture now, or if I explained something incorrectly, or if you see things differently. I'm curious. If you have questions, leave them below. Either I'll answer them, or there are always great responses from the community too. Otherwise, please give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, stay loyal to me, and remember to check your UV lighting, humidity, or the climate in your terrarium.